Hi guys, just back for another video, another topic. Um, I've been reading again. I went through a phase in my twenties of reading lots of horror, a bit of sci-fi, but a lot of horror, a lot of vampire novels, Stephen King, Anne Rice, um, Dean Koontz, and other stuff like that. Um, and recently I started reading again, and I've reread like some of the uh, some of the books, and it's almost like I've forgotten a lot of the contents in them, and they're like more they certainly seem more relevant now. I'm observing how fiction is reflecting reality, in the reality that we find ourselves surrounded in, the madness we find ourselves surrounded in. um, and recently I've been reading vampire novels. um, so I'm going to talk about two of the vampire novels I've been reading, um, and it just became really apparent. Like, we talk about things connecting, synchronicity. Um, how it's not coincidental and everything, and how the artists can, you know, potentially see into the future, possible futures of how things are going to be, and they may not consciously really be aware of it, but they're kind of expressing it. Um, Keeping that in mind, I read the first recent vampire one I read, and I've only read this once. It's called Let the Right One In, and it's heavy, and there's a film made of it as well. There's a film I think made in Eastern Europe, and the other one is an American one, but the original film is pretty good as well. But this is good, and it is very dark. It's set in Sweden, um, in the 1980s, in the late kind of early 80s, and it's basically the environment in the story. I mean, I guess it reflects like Sweden at the time. Um, I'm sure it's Sweden. Yeah, is people are very poor. Um, there's a lot of alcoholism, kind of, which is, you know, is an escapism. There's a lot of depression. There's a lot of drug problems. There's some crime. Um, so it's kind of like a, um, let's say, psychologically, um, even spiritually, like the environment of the book is almost primed for evil, if you know what I mean. People are psychologically weaker, more vulnerable, because of the poverty and lack of opportunity, etc. The picture it's the picture the story seems to paint, and so, you know, you have in the story a what appears to be a young girl and the father suddenly move in, to this neighborhood area, and you have the main character in the story. Well, the one of the main characters is a young boy, about 13, who is being bullied at school, and he's really struggling with himself. So he's suffering from depression, and what happens is he starts to kind of enroll in his own escapism. He starts to self fantasize about him being some fearless killer, because and he's fantasizing about him seeking revenge on the bullies and murdering them and stabbing them, because the reason for this is because there's a murder that took place. A guy was uh, found dead in a river or something like that, and there may have been Oh, I think it was a young boy as well that was found, and so he's kind of fantasizing about him perhaps being the killer, or certainly seeking revenge and killing the school bullies. Um, and he likes his comic books and everything, so that's how he's kind of coping. At the same time, he meets this what he thinks is a young girl living with her father, and he's really interested in her. She's very different, very strange, and I guess he likes strange. So he's kind of drawn to her, and she's kind of drawn to him as well. And he starts falling for her. I think he starts to kind of fall in love with her, um, and they start to form a relationship. And I think she starts falling for him. Um, at the same time, the character, the boy, his father is pretty much absent. He sees him on the weekend sometimes, but his father has a drinking problem, so he's got that instability, money problems. Mum's out working, you know. So he meets what he thinks is this girl, and things seem to be kind of going all right. But what slowly but surely you realise that this girl is a vampire for real, and the man is not her father. What he's doing is he's basically going out and murdering people, draining them of all of their blood, and then bringing it back to feed her, so that she doesn't have to go out and kill herself, because it's going to look more suspicious if a child is seen, you know, biting adults in public and drinking their blood and all that. So he's doing that for her in return. This because this guy is a pedophile. In return, he's kind of she's promised. Well, she's letting him touch her, and promising him affection like that. So you can see where this is going dark here. So you have the whole pedophile thing, and you have these random kind of murders happening. But there comes a point where this guy gets caught, and he is kind of he actually throws acid over himself to try and kill himself, but he doesn't. But anyway, he goes into hospital, so he's kind of out of the picture now. He can't feed the vampire girl, so she ends up going out and she starts to randomly suck off people, and she's not killing them. Um, and in the book, like in many vampire novels, it does make it clear that this vampire curse is a virus. There's actually like a physical element to this. It's not just supernatural. It actually is a blood virus that is passed on through contamination with the actual vampire to its victim through piercing, right? And in the story, it does go into detail that this parasite, once it enters the blood, it does latch on. It latches onto the heart and it grows. And it's the one that demands the blood, and it's the one that's allergic to the sunlight and everything. And eventually, this parasite will want to take the person completely over. It wants to weaken their will and have its instincts and its desires overtake the human. So you're almost looking at a soul death. In the end, the parasite will take over the person, and it becomes apparent where a lady, another character, she's bitten in the story, and then she thinks she's got a flu, and then it gets worse, and she burns when she comes in contact with the sun. And there's a sad instance where she knows that she can't live anymore because she's going to try and feed off people, that's her friends and even her boyfriend. So she kind of suicides herself in the hospital by opening the blind and everything. So we have connections here. We have just me just thinking kind of at the top of my head with this. We have the paedophilia. We have the virus, the blood virus. Another thing I want to mention is in the news, in the story, it's Russia every day. Threats of Russia. Russia's got nukes. Russia's got military subs with nukes in. and the in the story, everybody seems to be bombarded with this as mainstream news. The Russians are coming, the Russians are coming, and it's making people a little afraid and paranoid. At the same time, you have these murders happening. You have this mysterious virus spreading, this blood virus. Um, and another thing to top it off, slowly but surely, the character in the story, this boy, is falling in love with what he thinks is a girl. He comes to realise she's not a girl. She was originally a boy, um, and then you find out in the story that it explains how is explains the history of this child vampire, how he was turned is to do with some rich aristocratic lord about 200 years ago or more, who was lived in some castle or something, and he selected all of the handful of sons of the peasants of a village to come, and he was going to turn one of them. I think he was the vampire, I think, and he was going to turn one of these children, and he was rolling the dice to find out who it was going to be. And then in the story, the relieved parents take their sons, and then this one son stays, which is this vampire character. But it gets darker because in the story, without going into detail, he has his genitals cut off, he's castrated, and then after he's had that done to him, then he is basically turned into a vampire. So this vampire is looks feminized, so he's passing for a girl, but you have the whole, what made me think of the obvious is the whole transgender thing happening, and what's happening right now in the West, the whole transgender fashion. You got these crazy parents cutting off their children's genitals, cutting off their sons' genitals, and putting them on hormone blockers and making them freaks. So this sadly, this vampire really is a freak. He doesn't. He seems to be really genderless, and the boy who's falling in love with him is really thrown by this when uh, you know he approaches him naked, and he's like, what the hell, he has no genital, there's just nothing. And again, you have the whole transhuman, transgender. It's dark. You have the paedophilia, you have a virus, you have the blood virus, you have Russia, what's happening now with Russia, Ukraine, etc. So maybe I'm making something out of nothing, but I don't think so. There's something, when you observe fiction, it's uncanny how it can reflect, the the world around you in any time, but especially now with all this madness. And again, in the story, the most of the people are baffled. Very few people know what's going on. Practically none. I mean, the police are baffled. The hospital staff are baffled. Um, the parents are afraid, but they really don't know what's going on. There is a sense of kind of an inability to actually face reality. There's escapism with the drugs and the alcohol. There's um, a lack of kind of courage to actually see that maybe this is something very strange, and it goes a lot deeper than just surface level murders, etc. But in the story, the general public have the inability to kind of want to look there, and this is interesting as well. Yeah, so that's Let the Right One In. Give it a read if you're not squeamish, but it's pretty dark, but it's very good. Second one, I'm more than halfway through, and I've read this before, but I read it in my early 20s when I was really young. Salem's Lot, Stephen King. You've probably heard of it. I've forgotten a lot of it, and reading it is like reading it just fresh. There's so much. I kind of got through the first chapters and it's a little boring, but the more I got into it, the more I really started to see, a connection with, again, with what's happened to the world and the West, especially really. Um, this is more of a kind of a, well, both of them are kind of cheesy in their own way, but one of the obvious things is set in modern times. It's not set 200 years ago. It's set in a kind of modern society. But in this story, you have again, you have the vampires kind of move into this village, Salem's Lot, and it's just well, on the surface, it's a typical village, but again, like the in the other story, people have their own kind of struggles. There's a lot of kind of skeletons in the closet. There's within the whole community. There's a lot of kind of self denial of kind of their own problems, their own shadow. That's one of the things that Stephen King described in this in one of the chapters briefly, and he does it in a lot actually of his books. There's this self denial of people's individual shadow, the characters, the everyday they are the normies in this book. They're denying their own shadow. They're not looking, and collectively there is a collective shadow over the people in the village of Salem's Lot. So there's like a kink in their psychic armor, collectively and individually, um, and it seems to be what Stephen King and actually the character in the book, the main character, who's a writer himself in the book. He this was where he grew up as a child, and he wants to revisit this place. He wants to write another book, and there's his house there that's has a reputation of being haunted or very evil. And in the story, he remembers as a child he went in there and he saw a man hanging from the noose from his neck from a chandelier or something, looking at him. And this guy was like had died 50 years ago or something in the 40s. Story has it that there was some kind of gangster character who was caught up in crime, and he was pretty evil or something like that. He murdered his wife. He was responsible for some killings, and then he went and murdered himself. So the character believes, and Stephen King is hinting it as well, that evil attracts evil. So if you had an evil deed that happened in a house with evil people, then evil in general would be attracted to that place, and it can be and so in the story, the vampire character moves to Salem's Lot. It's basically you have this other character who's he's pretending to be a businessman, and he sets up shop. He sets up an antique shop. If you read the book, you'll know anyway. He sets up an antique shop selling kind of rare kind of collector's items. That's what he's masquerading as. But he's the master vampire's kind of what do you call it? Keeper. He's kind of watching over him, ready for takeover. So he's saying, "Oh, the character. What's his name? Mr. Barlow. I think that's the vampire's name. He always saying, oh, he's in there. He's out of he's on a buying trip in Europe somewhere, but he will be back. I'm kind of managing things for him." But it turns out this Barlow character and him, they are kind of they're kind of pretending to be business partners, all right, and they are in a way. But this Barlow character, he's actually in the Marsden house underneath the cellars in his coffin, and he's going out at night, and he started to make the first killings. First, he kills a dog and he impales it on the cemetery fence. Gate. and the night watchman sees it, and you see him. Well, you don't see him. You don't really know who it is, but you. There's this early scene when the vampire is praying to Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies, or something like that, and that dog was an offering for his evil god. It's either the vampire himself or this other character, the vampire's attendant keeper. Um, what's his name? Straker. I think his name's Straker. And he's a very, very strange character. Tall, very strong. He's got a kind of mesmerizing kind of vibe to him, an aura about him. People are drawn to him. Women are actually attracted to him, yet they're kind of a little bit repelled by him. They don't know why. It's kind of a combination of both. They're aroused, but repulsed and are frightened of him. So he does have that going for him, and so day by weeks lead to months, and then a child goes missing, and then another child, and again, people are becoming infected, but they are oblivious to the reality of what's happening. Again, because within that community, within that village, there's it's the perfect kind of environment for evil to uptake root and grow because of their lack of inability to face their shadow, individual shadows, collective shadows. Stephen King likes to do that. He says, oh, you would never know that so and so, is an alcoholic and beats his wife, and you would never know that the butch guy at the bar secretly kind of dresses up in kind of bras, suspenders, and then looks in the mirror and masturbates or something like that. You would never know that so and so around the corner who's a priest, who hears confessions, is trying to, thinks about killing himself every night or something like that. You see this kind of big kind of shadow within the whole community, and he's saying that evil will come to them because they're not psychically strong. And so it does, and eventually in the story, more and more people are being turned to the point where, my understanding is there's more of the vampires than normal humans. You're looking at, again, it's a soul death that's happening along with a physical virus. People are falling sick. They think it's some kind of immune disorder, something wrong with their white blood cell count, etc. Again, you have the virus thing, and you have the blood. But yeah, it's and again, people's inability to face reality, because in the story, the truth is stranger than fiction, or a stranger's fiction, right? And I'm using this as an example of what we're being faced right now. I mean, you have to be open-minded, but why here in keeping up to date with all of this? We are like living in the middle of a horror movie and a sci-fi fantasy movie, but it's real, it's reality. And I think most of the normies, just like the normies in these books, they can't face reality. They've been living in a fantasy, and at the same time, I think for this to take root, for the whole Rona, ping pong, um, scaredemic, to actually manifest, for the normies to soak up and eat up all the fear porn, they have to be primed for that. They have to be primed for this takeover. They have to be prepared for evil, and that would include weakening them psychically, mentally, spiritually. You need some kinks in those armor, in their armor, individually, collectively, as a society, as a culture. The West has to be weak for this to manifest. Men have to be weak. They have to be cowardly. They have to be afraid to actually speak their own minds or speak the truth. Look at the shadow. within them and within the collective and face it and try and do something about it. They have to be in denial. Everybody has to, want to escape into fantasy world, and I think that's what's happened collectively. Um, so, we've bought the whole ping pong, um, you know, fear porn, fake pandemic. Then we bought into the needlecraft to weaken us. There's the virus. That's the real virus coming in. First off, it was a mind virus, and then it's the real blood virus, or the real penetration into our bodies. And now this makes me think, going back to the whole vampire mythology. What does a vampire have to do in the story to actually begin a takeover? You have to invite them in, right? So physically you have to invite them into your house. But if you look at a country or a community, that's a house in its own right. And then you have a smaller version of that would be the family unit in the house, and then it's even on a even more of an individualistic level is you and your body. So the vampire, you have to consent, is what I'm saying with the vampire, which really is a virus inside a vessel. The intelligence and the consciousness is a virus. It's infected this person internally, and so it wants to procreate. It wants to reproduce, but there are laws it has to kind of abide by, and that is it has to ask you for consent, and so it has to ask permission. Can I come in? Can I cross the threshold into your personal space and safety? If you say yes, now you've allowed invitation for the vampire to basically try and take you over. And in the stories, like in lots of vampire novels, if you really are, if you're open and you invite a vampire willingly, death can be very hypnotizing and very pleasurable. And in the story, it is to some. They like it, and eventually they actually want to die. The vampire is psychic. It reads their minds and it draws on their insecurities, and it understand. It will look into their shadow and their pain and say, well, how about you never have to face this again? You don't have to suffer anymore. How about that? And the people that want that, the normies in the story, they are willing, and they say, yeah, I'll give myself. I don't want to exist anymore. And so they're turned. Again, consent, willingness to partake. We have saw that with the normies. We've sat and we watched this takeover, right? Because I believe that it was the right time for evil to move. Go back to 2009 with the pig flu. People were not only more savvy, but I think the West wasn't quite weak enough. But now we are, by the looks of it, sadly. And so that's what's happened, because you've got to look at the clots they're pulling out of people. Lots of people have said they look like strange kind of creatures, Lovecraftian creatures, octopus-like. But then I watched another video from Alex Jones' Prison Planet, and this doctor was saying these things, they're not actually blood clots. They're not made from blood. They're made from reconstructed material within a body, but they're not blood. They're a totally different kind of texture. They're very tough. They're like elastic, and some of these are thick as somebody's finger. They're fucking massive, and they are, by the looks of it, built by this artificially programmed RNA that's making these things inside a body. It's like a invasion. These things were pulled out of dead bodies, and then they were examined, and they just defy anything natural. So it's like a sci-fi movie, you know. You think of the obvious ones. How many films have there been about things like this? You know, what's the film Outbreak, and you know, so much. I'll talk about that in other videos. How there's been loads of films showing about viruses and everything. X-Files is all, you know, there's so many series of X-Files talking about viruses and stuff. But the vampire one is really interesting. It really relates to what's happening now, because here's another thing. You know, the vampire mythology, one way of seeing it really is it's an expression of how evil is manifesting within within that specific time, or it's a, you know, a human expression, let's say, of what evil could be, how it could come through into this reality. And so evil can take many forms, you know. It all depends on perhaps it depends on the fear of the group, the collective, right? So I know you had a few hundred years ago, I think, when there was some kind of pandemic or something, maybe it was to do with the Black Death. You had people that were buried, and then they would come alive, and they would scratch at coffins or something. I think the term dead ringer comes from that, where they would have a bell in the coffin because they knew this happened, and the person would ring the bell if they were alive. But also, some of these people were so, let's say, diseased that they were past the point of no return. There wasn't really anything sentient in there. They would try and eat, if they would come to life, and they would actually try and eat the person in front of them if anybody saw them, or something like that. So maybe the vampire thing come from there as well. I heard it somewhere anyway. But the point I'm making is, we have the unseen and the seen. You know, as above, so below. So you have, you know, the spiritual side, the paranormal side, manifesting into the physical. So it can be many things. You know, it could, you know, be vampire, UFO, but virus, why not? You know, and the vampire thing certainly connects to the virus, the blood virus. So again, in these stories, it's the normie's inability to face anything paranormal, anything spiritual, anything unseen, the unwillingness to believe that there is evil, and there is such thing as spiritual warfare, and I'm being under spiritual attack, and having to actually face that. You know, most of the people in these stories don't want to face that. In Salem's Lot, there's just a handful of people, and well, in the village, that face it. There's the writer, there's a young boy, and a doctor, and they're the ones that actually realise this is the real deal. This is high strangeness, and they're the ones that get the holy water, the Bible, and the cross, and they actually start to believe in the power of good. And they realise that this is spiritual warfare here, and something has to be done, and they take action. And you know, they're the ones that pretty much end up surviving. So yeah, interesting times, eh? And you know, certainly good to observe fiction and realise that, you know, reality seems to be stranger than fiction right now. Yeah, all right, enough said. I'll talk to you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Bye.